Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into a massive high-stakes tug-of-war playing out right now between executive immigration enforcement and federal court oversight. We're sticking strictly to the documented facts to unpack exactly where the boundary lines of power are being drawn.
So let's start with a question that sounds like a total hypothetical, but trust me, it's not. What actually happens when the U.S. government deports someone by mistake? It's a wildly bizarre scenario, but it's exactly what happened in the real world to a man named Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
And the fallout from that one mistake led a federal judge, U.S. District Judge Waverly Crenshaw, to issue this absolute bombshell of a statement. He wrote, "The evidence before this court sadly reflects an abuse of prosecuting power." Now, to figure out how a federal judge gets to the point of issuing such a serious rebuke of the Department of Justice, we've got to look at the whole board.
Section 1. A tale of two cases.
We're looking at two huge, contrasting immigration cases from the second Trump administration that really test the limits of executive power. On one hand, you have Mahmoud Khalil, a former Columbia student. His constitutional challenge against deportation got completely channeled away from federal courts and shoved into executive immigration tribunals. But then, on the flip side, you have Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who actually won a stunning dismissal of criminal charges from an independent federal judge. It's a perfect contrast that highlights just how inconsistent the boundaries of judicial power are right now.
Section 2. The mistaken deportation. Let's zoom in on the wild timeline of the Abrego Garcia case. To understand the mistake that kicked off this whole international legal battle, you first need to know about withholding of removal. Basically, this is a legal order that totally prevents deportation to a specific country if the person faces a clear probability of danger there. Abrego Garcia had fled El Salvador as a teenager because of gang threats, and in 2019, he was legally granted this exact protection.
But fast forward to March 2025, and the administration completely defied that 2019 court order. Abrego Garcia was literally swept up, put on a plane load of alleged gang members, and flown directly to El Salvador's massive CECOT megaprison. An ICE official actually conceded later, on the record, that the whole thing was an administrative error.
The timeline here is absolutely crucial, so let's walk through it. Back in November 2022, he has a routine traffic stop in Tennessee. Nothing really happens. Then March 2025 hits, and he's mistakenly deported. By April, his lawyers file a civil lawsuit, and the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously orders the government to bring him back. But then, and here's the crazy part, in May 2025, right after winning his civil case, he is suddenly hit with a criminal indictment based on that years-old traffic stop. You can see why those sudden charges raised immediate, glaring red flags for the federal judge.
Section 3. A global runaround.
Before those criminal charges dropped, the government made some extraordinary moves during the civil case to avoid bringing him back to the U.S. Returning him to his family in Maryland wasn't the only option on the table either. Costa Rica actually stepped up and unconditionally offered him residence and refugee status. It was safe, it was perfectly legal, and Abrego Garcia was totally on board. But the government refused.
Instead of Costa Rica, the government decided to issue serial notices of expulsion to a bizarre sequence of African nations. First it was Uganda, then Eswatini, then Ghana, and finally Liberia.
And man, did this cause some serious diplomatic friction. When the federal court started demanding answers, the government's narrative just unraveled. Eswatini publicly denied having any agreement whatsoever. Ghana's foreign minister flat out announced they were absolutely not accepting him. Ultimately, the judge found the government officials were making affirmative misrepresentations to the federal court about these diplomatic talks.
Section 4. The retaliatory indictment.
So that brings us to the climax of this saga. After the Supreme Court practically forces his return to the U.S., Abrego Garcia walks right into a retaliatory indictment. The U.S. Attorney's Office officially charged him with human smuggling. And remember, this was based entirely on that traffic stop from way back in 2022. A stop where he was literally just pulled over for speeding, given a warning, and let go.
Which brings us to a really startling number, 903. That is exactly how many days passed between that routine traffic stop and the sudden criminal indictment. Data presented in court showed just how wildly atypical a delay like that is for standard cases in the Sixth Circuit. It was glaring evidence that something else was completely driving this prosecution. In the legal world, that something else is called vindictive prosecution. Basically, it's when a prosecutor uses their power not to seek justice, but specifically to punish someone for exercising a protected right. You know, a right like successfully suing the government for wrongfully deporting you.
This was the exact legal standard the defense used to get the judge to throw those charges out. And they essentially had a smoking gun. During a TV interview, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche flat out said that the renewed criminal investigation started because a judge in Maryland questioned us and accused the government of doing something wrong. The federal judge pointed to that public statement as a direct link between the criminal probe and Abrego Garcia's civil win, proving presumptive vindictiveness.
On top of all that, the core narrative the government used to justify treating him so harshly that he was an MS-13 gang member relied heavily on a 2019 report from a Maryland police officer. Well, as the source materials reveal, that very same officer was later indicted and suspended for giving confidential police info to a commercial sex worker. So the foundational evidence for that gang claim was severely compromised right out of the gate.
Section 5. The limits of judicial power.
Now, obviously, Abrego Garcia won here, and the judge dismissed those retaliatory charges, but federal courts can't always swoop in to save the day. To grasp the bigger, systemic picture, we have to look back at Mahmoud Khalil. See, it's like playing on two completely different fields. You've got Article 3 federal courts run by independent judges with lifetime appointments, and then you have executive immigration courts, which are essentially just tribunals supervised directly by the Attorney General. Because of a 1996 jurisdiction stripping law, Khalil was legally blocked from taking his First Amendment claims to an independent judge. He was forced to fight for his rights inside the very same executive branch that was trying to kick him out.
This setup has deeply alarmed some judges. Third Circuit Judge Cheryl Ann Krause actually wrote a dissenting warning about it. She argued that the judiciary cannot fulfill its role as a check on the other branches of government if we write ourselves out of relevance and leave the executive branch to check itself. It really nails the incredibly high stakes for civil liberties when federal judges get stripped of their jurisdiction.
Section 6. The broader legal impact.
So, what do these two intertwining cases actually tell us about the balance of power in America right now? Well, here are the key takeaways. First, when federal courts actually have jurisdiction, they can and will successfully curb undeniable, documented executive retaliation. We saw that clear as day with Abrego Garcia. But, on the flip side, jurisdiction stripping laws severely limit those constitutional checks before someone is actually removed, like we saw with Khalil. The bottom line? The tension between executive immigration enforcement and independent judicial oversight is escalating fast.
Which leaves us with this incredibly provocative question. When jurisdiction is stripped from independent Article 3 courts, who actually ensures that the Constitution protects the rights of individuals facing the full, coercive weight of the executive branch? It's a huge question that goes right to the core of American due process. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.